They say that war never changes. Sure, the tools used to wage it and the hands that wield them may change over time, but that all-too-human capacity for complete destruction, the capacity to make unending war, that never does. It's hard to say why we wage war, whether for personal or political reasons. Maybe it's just our way of letting loose and giving in to our more base instincts. Maybe that's why they did it 200 years ago. War was a handy outlet for a number of their human vices, and for the rest, well, they had Vegas. In the old world, back when it was called Las Vegas, folk from all across America would travel to this bustling city to gamble, drink, and scratch any other primal urges they may have had. Locals could sit by a pool of rat-free water and sip the best liquor the old world could offer, all while watching distant mushroom clouds from the comfort of the Strip. They'd never dreamed that the city of endless excess and debauchery would soon die with them. When the bombs dropped and the world officially ended, Vegas was one of the few locations in the country that wasn't directly hit, thanks to the handiwork of one Mr. Robert House. Surviving didn't necessarily mean thriving, though, as for the many years that followed, New Vegas became just another mess of old-world stone in the desert. That would only change when, many years after the Great War, Mr. House, still alive somehow, spotted an NCR scouting party nearby. You probably know the rest. How Mr. House tamed the tribals and put them in charge of his casinos, rolling out dozens of Securitrons to keep the peace. As Vegas established itself as its own independent state in the Mojave, locals from all around the wasteland came to blow their money on booze, women, and slot machines. Just like the good old days. Problem was, even if Vegas didn't fundamentally change, the world around it certainly did. Folk who didn't exactly hit the jackpot in Vegas didn't have cushy jobs to go back to like in the old world. Instead, once their caps went dry, that was it. Their entire life's fortune gone in an instant. Most of those unfortunate souls took to the areas surrounding Vegas and set up shop, probably in the hopes that they may still one day strike it big and earn their fortune. Partner that up with a number of armed thugs and chemidicks, and you've got Freeside. Worse yet, the benevolent Mr. House had his eyes focused on the Strip, only using Freeside as a means of filtering out anyone he saw as an undesirable. Freeside was without rule. Murders, robberies, and extortion became the law of the land for a few years, at least until order was finally established by a few factions. A gang of fashionable punks known as the Kings began operating out of an old-world religious building dedicated to an old god, same as a branch of the followers of the Apocalypse. The Kings helped to keep the whole of Freeside from erupting into all-out chaos, while the followers helped the community's basic needs of water, food, and medical supplies. Independent stores opened up in Freeside as well. Places like the Atomic Wrangler, Mick and Ralph's, and the Silver Rush helped give Freeside a certain something that Vegas lacked, a twisted sense of community. Sure, life was hell, but life was hell for everyone. Well, at least for the locals. As more people came to the Strip in droves, Freeside soon played host to all sorts of new denizens. These squatters didn't get much sympathy from the locals, especially if they were NCR. In the months leading up to the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, there were a number of incidents involving the NCR squatters and angry Freesiders getting into violent spats or shootouts. The Kings in particular didn't care for the military presence, declaring in no uncertain terms that the NCR and their citizens were no friends of Freeside. From there, things reached a sort of status quo. The NCR didn't have the expendable resources to divulge on Freeside, too focused on the dam and trying to stay on Mr. House's good side. Times were tense, but manageable. It wasn't until after the Second Battle of Hoover Dam that Freeside was given much, much more attention. Once it was clear that the Courier's promise of an independent New Vegas was shattered, Freeside witnessed one of the largest military takeovers in recent history. The NCR marched into Vegas and its surrounding territories, taking the Strip for themselves and establishing their rule over Freeside. At the end of the day, an NCR flag flew proudly over the Strip, proclaiming to all that saw it that their way of life had changed forever. Predictably, Freesiders weren't too happy about their new NCR overlords, and tensions between the two groups only worsened by the annexation. As time progressed, Freeside and its surrounding areas slowly became a more and more dangerous place, not just through NCR persecution, but through foreign attacks as well. Now that Vegas was NCR property, the Republic's many enemies turned their gaze towards the city. Raider factions like the Fiends and leftover tribals from the Legion routinely staged attacks on Vegas, with Freeside taking the brunt force of their violent hatred. The NCR did little to help Freeside during these attacks, seemingly content to let the slums fight their battles for them. That doesn't mean they turned a blind eye to the community, though. Turns out, the NCR had bigger plans for Vegas than just liquor and slot machines. They set up an improvised research facility in Vault 21, and then later the Lucky 38, with the assumed goal of scientific progress. The NCR eggheads began experimenting with different forms of radiation treatment, hoping to find a more effective way to care for their irradiated soldiers. A noble goal, with a not-so-noble execution. The thing with any research project is that, eventually, you're going to need someone to be the test subject, and there weren't many NCR citizens lining up to be guinea pigs. Luckily for them, there was no shortage of Freeside junkies for them to forcibly volunteer. NCR soldiers began abducting Freeside locals in the night, forcing these mostly innocent folk to be cattle for their scientists' twisted experiments. As the situation escalated in Freeside, the NCR set in place a strict curfew, one that they enforced with great prejudice. As abductions and executions began to grow, the tensions in Freeside reached a fever pitch. There was only so much the locals could endure before complete anarchy broke out. And the NCR didn't have to wait long. When it was revealed that a radioactive dust storm was heading their way and that the Republic was planning on leaving the rest of the Mojave for dead, it pushed Freeside over the edge. They began to kill any NCR troopers they can get their hands on by any means necessary. The streets of Freeside became improvised war zones, with Freesiders employing guerrilla-style tactics in their fight against the NCR. Protests and vandalism became commonplace against NCR property and personnel. At one point, the Freesiders even stormed the gate to Vegas itself, launching a full-on assault on the Lucky 38 and killing plenty of NCR with them. Although the NCR was able to fight back against the Freesiders each time, the casualties they were causing did not go unnoticed. Unfortunately, the Freeside uprising wasn't the only time bomb the NCR had to worry about. Shortly after one of the mini revolts, a biological weapon was unleashed on the Strip, causing untold amounts of death and chaos. The NCR was quick in their response as they began to lock down the Strip itself, damning anyone inside to a horrifying fate. Only then would the Freeside revolts become a genuine, full-blown rebellion. Renaming themselves the New Vegas Rebels, the King and his gang, along with a few other key players in the Freeside community, staged a full-on assault against the NCR forces, blasting open the door to the Strip and aiding the escape of dozens of those trapped there by the toxic cloud. The casualties were great, but in the end, the rebels were still no match for the NCR firepower, ultimately being forced to retreat. Some of the rebels were able to escape Freeside, while others took to the sewers beneath Vegas to continue fighting. The NCR had attempted to breach the sewers a few times, trying to exterminate the last of the rebels held up there, but found little success. After a series of failures and most NCR citizens being evacuated, the leftover military presence on the Strip decided enough was enough. They dumped radioactive materials into the sewers in order to sabotage the remaining rebel positions, before abandoning the Strip entirely. And just like that, it was over. A revolution with no victor. The few that managed to escape Vegas with the King went southeast towards Boulder City to hold up. They had survived the battle, but only barely, needing a place to care for their wounded and regroup. The King died shortly after they got there, suffering a fatal gunshot wound during the fighting. Left leaderless, the future of the rebels was uncertain. Rumor has it they managed to scavenge a few pre-war hazmat suits for an old NCR stockpile, which scarcely protected them as the dust storm finally reached the Mojave and mixed with the toxic cloud. Their fates are unknown, though I wouldn't recommend making your way to Boulder City to check on them. Meanwhile, the few rebels still held up in the sewers eventually were forced to leave by lack of supplies and the NCR's radioactive sabotage. Their hope was to be able to make the sewers beneath Vegas into a safe zone for any weary travelers in the wastes, though that never actually ended up happening. The remaining rebels made their way to Jacobstown, that old super mutant refuge northwest of Vegas. Hard to say what happened to them, but something tells me they could only coexist for so long. And just like that, the New Vegas rebels were no more. Their dream of rebuilding Vegas dying with them. Vegas had died its second death, this time not by atomic fire, but by that all-too-human capacity for complete destruction. To wage war. No need for bombs when hate will do. The rebels' dream of rebuilding Vegas never saw fruition, but it's still one that some people hold on to today. After all, they already did it once. Though the rebels weren't the only folks who dreamed of returning to Vegas one day. A rogue NCR expedition arrived about 2 years ago with hopes of returning to the Strip. Not to rebuild it, but to continue doing their horrifying research. But that is a story for another day.